I saw my daughter-in-law toss my granddaughter's baby blanket into the trash like it meant nothing. The same blanket I'd spent weeks knitting stitch by stitch when my son was still alive. My hands shook as I pulled it out thinking of my little girl. It smelled like her soft soap and sunlight, but when I laid it on my bed, something felt wrong. There was a lump inside, hard and heavy. I thought it might be a toy or maybe a keepsake, but when I cut the seam open and saw what was hidden inside, my whole body went cold. That's the moment I realized my son's death was never an accident. I'm about to share something very close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story reaches. It's always comforting to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If you believe no mother should ever have to bury her child twice, once in the ground and once in silence, please subscribe to our channel. My name is Rhea Calloway, and this is how one forgotten blanket unraveled every secret I was never meant to find. It was late autumn, the kind of evening when the air smells faintly of rain and wood smoke. I was driving home through the quiet hills outside Asheville when I decided to stop by Maris's house. I'd bought a set of wooden toys for my granddaughter Nova and planned to leave them by the porch. I didn't want to disturb anyone, just a small surprise for the child I loved more than my own breath. But as I parked by the curb, headlights sweeping across the driveway, I saw something that made my heart freeze. Maris was dragging a heavy trash bag toward the bin by the garage. The way she yanked it like she wanted to bury whatever was inside made me pause. Then I saw it. The mint green blanket. My blanket. The one I had knitted for Nova when she was born, each stitch carrying prayers for a happy family. It was half stuck out of the bag, dirt smudging the edges. I don't remember thinking. My body just moved. I crossed the street, my shoes crunching against gravel, and reached the bin before the lid slammed shut. Maris turned her eyes, catching the porch light cold, unreadable. "Rhea, what are you doing?" she asked. Her voice was calm but sharp like a knife under silk. "That blanket's filthy. I was going to throw it out." I didn't answer. I pulled it free, clutching it against my chest. I could smell her perfume on it, something expensive and new, too fresh for something she claimed hadn't been used in years. "It's mine," I said quietly. "I'll wash it." She stared at me for a second too long, then smiled, polite but tight. "Suit yourself." When I got home, the mountains were hidden in mist. My cabin felt smaller than usual, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. I spread the blanket on my bed and turned on the lamp. The color looked duller under the light, but the edges were still neat. I ran my fingers along the stitches. Halfway down, I felt something, a hard, rectangular lump. My stomach tightened. It wasn't part of the stuffing. I turned it over, checking the underside. The stitches were slightly off the thread, a shade darker than the rest. A crooked seam. Someone had opened the blanket and sewn it shut again. I went to my sewing drawer and pulled out the old scissors I'd used when I first made it. My hands trembled. The sound of each snip echoed through the room, sharp and lonely. I cut along the uneven seam thread by thread until the fabric loosened. Then something slipped out and landed on the quilt with a soft thud. A black phone, small, old, the kind you'd expect to see in a drawer years after it stopped working. I turned it over, no fingerprints, no scratches, just a dead silent screen. I found a charger in the kitchen, one I'd kept from an older model. When I plugged it in, the faintest glow appeared like an eye opening after years of sleep. The battery icon blinked. No password screen, no lock, just the home screen waiting for someone to look. I should have checked it right then, but I couldn't. My throat was dry, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. The thought of what might be inside felt heavier than the phone itself. I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark. The only light came from the charging cable, a thin blue line cutting through the room. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, holding the phone close, and sat in my old armchair by the window. Outside, the mist pressed against the glass like a ghost wanting in. I didn't sleep. I just stared into the dark and told myself that in the morning I'd find the courage to see what secrets my son's house had tried to bury. I didn't know it yet, but that blanket had just saved a secret that someone desperately wanted gone. Morning came pale and quiet. Sunlight filtered through fog that clung to the blue ridge. I brewed coffee, but it tasted bitter, like guilt. The phone was still on my desk, charging screen dim but alive. My hands hesitated over it as if touching it might turn me into someone else, a mother who no longer recognized her own family. Then I tapped the screen. It opened to a photo gallery. The first image was Maris, my daughter-in-law, smiling at a restaurant table, wine glass in hand. But she wasn't alone. A man sat beside her, arm draped around her shoulders, his face close to hers. He was younger than my son, Grant, rugged, the kind of man who looked too confident for his own good. The timestamp said 4 years ago when Grant was still alive. I swiped again, another photo, Maris and the same man on a lakeshore, another in a hotel room mirror, another in a car. My breath caught with each swipe. Every picture was proof of betrayal. I felt a rush of heat crawl up my neck, anger mixing with disbelief. Grant had trusted her, loved her, beyond reason. I'd seen the way his eyes softened whenever she entered the room. I pressed messages. The first conversation was with someone saved only as H. I scrolled through months of texts, sweet words at first, then urgent, angry ones. "I can't stand pretending anymore," she wrote. "If he just disappeared, we could finally live." My hands went cold. H replied, "Don't say that. You'll make me think you're serious." She responded, "I am." I scrolled faster. The dates crept closer to the week of Grant's death. Tuesday, 3:00 p.m., Maris wrote. "He'll be home alone. Everything has to look natural." My eyes burned as I read it again and again. 3:00 p.m., the same hour the hospital had called me. The phone felt poisonous in my hand. I moved to the Notes app, hoping maybe for an explanation for something that made sense. There was only one entry staircase. No marks. No one can suspect. My stomach turned. I opened one more folder labeled Videos. The first clip began with the living room in Grant's house. The gray sofa, the painting he'd chosen on their first anniversary. Then Maris walked into the frame with the same man from the photos. Harlan. They kissed, laughing like children sneaking into forbidden territory. I stopped the video, my hands trembling. I pressed my palms to my face, but the images stayed burned into my eyes. I should have smashed the phone right then. Instead, I forced myself to breathe and took screenshots of everything, saving them to a USB drive. My mind screamed that every second I held that phone, I was touching the reason my son was dead. But another part of me, the teacher, the rational widow, knew that destroying evidence meant losing truth. I checked the photo details again, all time-stamped within a week of Grant's accident. Then I noticed one more file in the documents folder. policychiudeclan.gv. It was a scanned insurance policy. I opened it. At the top, Grant Calloway, life insurance. Beneficiary Maris Vance. Scrawled across the margin in handwriting I didn't recognize were the words, "The answer to the future." My breath hitched. It wasn't just betrayal, it was motive. Love money control. Everything hidden inside a child's blanket. I sat at the desk until the light outside shifted from gold to gray, trying to understand how long she'd planned it, how she'd smiled through dinners, kissed my granddaughter goodnight, and still gone to bed, knowing what she'd done. By the time the sky turned dark again, I had stopped crying. I copied every file onto the USB, labeled it For Grant, and locked it in my drawer. Then I turned off the phone, wrapped it back inside the blanket, and whispered, "If this is all just a misunderstanding, then why would an innocent woman hide her husband's phone inside her daughter's blanket and throw it away?" I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew one thing: tomorrow I'd start looking for it. Maris's house in Hendersonville looked exactly the same as it had the day we buried my son, neat, symmetrical, and soulless. The flower beds were trimmed to perfection, every petal in place, as if even grief had to be organized here. I told her I wanted to see Nova for a few minutes, that I missed her laugh. She hesitated before answering, her tone perfectly polite, but laced with suspicion. "Of course, Rhea. Just for a little while. She's taking her nap." I could almost hear the unspoken line beneath her smile. "Don't stay too long." I brought Clara Duval with me, an old friend from the school where I'd once taught. I introduced her as a friend who wanted to say hello. Clara, warm and disarming, shook Maris's hand like they'd known each other for years. I'd rehearsed our plan in the car. Clara would keep her calm, and when I gave her the nod, she'd excuse herself to use the restroom. That would be her opening to look around. Maris led us into the living room. It smelled faintly of lavender polish and something sharper antiseptic, the same smell that had clung to the blanket. Nova was asleep upstairs, Maris said, and I nodded, pretending to relax. We sat with tea and forced conversation. I asked about her work at the hospital, about the charity gala she'd mentioned online. She smiled with that perfect, controlled poise that always unsettled me. Every word rehearsed, every gesture meant to prove she had nothing to hide. 10 minutes in, Clara caught my eye and murmured, "Do you mind if I use your bathroom?" Maris waved toward the hallway, distracted as I mentioned Grant's old record collection. She stiffened slightly, her fingers tightening around her teacup. "You still have his things?" I asked softly. "I thought you might have kept some." Her smile faltered for half a second, then returned. "No. I gave most of it away. It was time." While she talked, I noticed how she avoided looking at the staircase, the same staircase where my son had fallen. The wood was recently sanded, the banister gleaming under a fresh coat of varnish. When she turned to pour more tea, I reached for my phone and with a trembling thumb snapped a picture of the lower steps. A thin crack ran along the edge of one, filled with something white, fresh paint, covering more than just age. Clara reappeared from the hallway 10 minutes later, her purse slightly heavier. She gave me the faintest nod. I stood, pretending to stretch. "Could I see Nova before I go?" I asked. Maris led me upstairs, heels clicking too fast, voice too bright. Nova was awake, rubbing her eyes, her curls tangled from sleep. I knelt by her bed, hugging her small frame, inhaling that mix of milk and sunshine that only children carry. "You look just like your daddy," I whispered. Behind me, Maris shifted. I turned in time to see her gripping the railing, knuckles pale. Her eyes flicked toward the stairs, then back to me. "Please be careful," she said tightly. "The paint's still drying." Her words were casual, but something beneath them quivered. I kissed Nova's forehead, smiled, and stood. "You've done a beautiful job with this place," I said, and for the first time, she didn't reply. Clara met me by the door, her voice too even. "Lovely home," she told Maris. We stepped out into the cool air, walking briskly toward the car, before either of us dared to breathe. Once inside, Clara pulled a small envelope from her purse. Inside were photocopies of bank statements transfers from Maris's account to H. Gage Construction Services, dated 2 weeks after the insurance payout. Another document was a printed copy of the same policy file I'd found on the phone. Same name, same signature, same date. But it was the last paper that made my skin prickle. A birth certificate. Nova Vance, it read at the top. Yet under Mother's name, it wasn't Maris. It was Lucia Vega. The birth date was 2 months earlier than Maris's supposed due date the hospital listed as Blue Ridge Memorial. I read it again slower, as if the letters might change. "Lucia Vega," I whispered. "Who the hell is Lucia Vega?" Clara pulled out one more thing she'd found tucked inside Nova's toy basket, a small photo printed on glossy paper. It showed a woman lying in a hospital bed, newborn in her arms. Behind her, in the corner of the frame, stood Maris wearing a nurse's uniform, her hand resting on the cradle. My blood turned to ice. The ride home was silent. I stared out at the mountains, their peaks swallowed in cloud, while Clara drove. If she could fake a family this perfectly, I finally said she could fake anything. Clara nodded, eyes fixed on the road. Then we take this to someone who can't be fooled. I looked down at the folder of papers in my lap, the ink smudging under my fingers. It's time, I said. Time to let someone else see what she's done. The rain started before sunrise, a steady curtain over downtown Asheville. Clara met me outside an old red brick building that leaned slightly against the gray sky. Inside the hallway smelled of coffee and dust. The nameplate on the door read Jonah Creed, Private Investigations. He looked up from his desk when we walked in. Tall, mid-40s, a face that had seen too many lies and didn't flinch at new ones. I handed him the folder without preamble. It's about my son, I said, Grant Calloway. His death was ruled an accident. I don't believe it. At first, Jonah was cautious, almost indifferent. He flipped through the documents while sipping black coffee, his eyes scanning every page with the patience of a man used to half-truths. Then he reached the photograph of Maris in the hospital uniform. His expression changed. "This is your daughter-in-law?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "And that baby?" "That's my granddaughter." He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "You're sure I made that blanket she's wrapped in?" I replied. That was enough. He spread everything across the desk, the bank statements, the insurance file, the photo, the USB from the phone. "Let's start with the basics," he said, turning to his computer. Grant's official cause of death. Fall from the second-floor landing. Cervical fracture. They said it was instantaneous. Jonah opened 2 digital reports side by side. "This is the copy filed at the coroner's office," he said, scrolling down. "And this is the one submitted to the insurance company." I watched his brow tighten. They're not the same. The second report was missing the last page, the one detailing contusions on the wrists and forearms. The date of the signature was 2 days later than the first. "Someone replaced it," Jonah murmured. "Do you know who handled the paperwork?" "Maris," I said. "She insisted on doing it herself. She said she wanted everything clean and quick." Jonah typed something else into his database. "Let's talk about this Lucia Vega. You said her name was on the birth certificate." "Yes, the hospital is Blue Ridge Memorial." His fingers flew over the keys, pulling up records. "There was a woman by that name," he said after a moment. "She gave birth to a girl 3 years ago, same week your granddaughter was born. But her file was deleted from the system less than a month later." He clicked through security logs. Only staff accounts could do that. And look here. The ID that accessed and deleted the file belongs to Maris Vance. For a second, the room felt colder. Clara covered her mouth. I gripped the chair so hard my knuckles went white. "She's been erasing her tracks for years," I whispered. Jonah picked up the phone and called the hospital's administrative office. "This is Detective Creed," he said smoothly. "I'm following up on a missing patient record. Lucia Vega." A pause, the sound of a clerk typing. "Then I'm sorry, Detective." "Miss Vega relocated out of state." Jonah's eyes flicked to me. I shook my head. "That's not true. Her father still lives here. He's been searching for her for years." He hung up slowly. "Then she didn't relocate," he said quietly. "She disappeared." Jonah turned to me. "I'm reopening your son's file. From this moment, it's no longer an accident. We're treating it as homicide." He gathered the papers, sliding them into a new folder. "But I need you to keep quiet. If Maris suspects we're looking, she'll cover her trail again." Outside, the rain had turned to a downpour. I stood under the awning while Clara pulled the car around the file, heavy in my bag. Water streamed down the steps like veins of glass. I looked out at the gray blur of the street and felt the ground tilt under me. Someone had falsified the autopsy report. Someone inside the system had protected her. The thought thudded in my chest with every raindrop. As we drove away, Asheville's streets glowed slick under the streetlights, each reflection trembling with truth, half revealed. In the silence of the car, Jonah's final words echoed in my mind. "If the records were changed, Mrs. Calloway, that means she's not the only one involved." I turned toward the window, the mountains hidden behind sheets of rain, and whispered to myself, "Then who's been helping her all this time?" The rain had stopped leaving. Asheville washed clean but uneasy. Clara and I met Rafael Vega at a cafe tucked between old art galleries in the River Arts District. He looked older than the photo I'd seen online, his dark eyes lined with worry that had long since hardened into habit. He set down his coffee, and when I told him Lucia's name, something in him stilled. "You found something," he said, "about my daughter." I opened the folder on the table showing him the photo of Maris in her nurse's uniform beside the hospital bed. Raphael's hand shook as he touched the image. "That's her," he whispered. "Lucia. She sent me this picture the day after giving birth. She said the nurse was kind, stayed with her all night." His voice cracked. "That nurse is your daughter-in-law." I nodded. The cafe's hum faded until it was just the three of us, each of us holding a piece of the same terrible puzzle. By the time I left Raphael, my phone buzzed. Jonah's name flashed across the screen. His voice was clipped urgent. "We found something. $200,000 transferred from Grant's life insurance payout into a company called HG Construction. It's registered to a man named Harlan Gage. He and Maris were seen together years ago. Ring any bells?" I felt my stomach twist. "She used to mention a contractor," I said quietly. "Said he helped with repairs after the accident." Jonah sighed. "Repairs, huh? The transfer went through 12 days after your son died. The same day she filed the insurance claim. The rest of the day passed in fragments, calls, emails, more questions than answers. By evening, Jonah had sent a team to track Harlan, but he was already gone. His phone disconnected, his construction office empty. I couldn't sit still. I drove to Hendersonville, back to the house where Grant had fallen. The street was dark except for the flicker of a single porch light. Across the road, a silver pickup idled quietly. A man sat behind the wheel cap, pulled low cigarette, glowing in the dark. I stepped closer, pretending to check my phone. The man looked up just long enough for me to see the profile I recognized from Maris's old photos. Harlan Gage. My pulse stuttered. I raised my phone to snap a picture, but he started the engine and pulled away tires, whispering against wet asphalt. Back home, the silence pressed in on me. I bolted the door, checked the windows twice. Then the doorbell rang once, then again, quick, sharp, and wrong. I froze. The porch light flickered through the window blinds. I opened the door just enough to see the envelope on the welcome mat. No return address, my name written in slanted ink, Rhea. Inside was a single sheet of paper words, scrawled in thick marker, "Stop digging, or you'll follow your son." I read it twice before my hands began to shake. I sank onto the floor, the paper fluttering in my lap. I had spent weeks trying to understand what kind of woman could plan her husband's death. Now I knew she wasn't working alone, and whoever she worked with still had eyes on me. I locked the door again, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark. The rain began again, soft against the windows. I reached for my phone to call Jonah, but before I could dial, the screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. "Don't trust the police. She has someone inside." The phone slipped from my hand. Outside, the rain whispered against the roof, like a warning I could almost understand. I took the envelope to Jonah the next morning. He studied it without touching the paper, then leaned back in his chair. "We've been hearing rumors about leaks in the department," he said. "Someone's been feeding her information, maybe even cleaning her tracks. Keep quiet about this. If she knows you got that note, she'll use whoever's on her side to erase the rest." When he tried to log into the police database, the system froze. He frowned and typed again. "That's strange," he muttered. "Grant's case file is gone." He scrolled through backup drives, pulling up the digital autopsy report, the insurance documentation, everything we had found. All gone. "This was erased last night," he said. "Not archived, deleted." He opened the access log. The last login came from a courthouse terminal under the name D. Lambert, a legal clerk known for processing insurance disputes. Jonah rubbed his temples. "Lambert," he said. "Went to high school with Maris Vance." I felt a chill creep up my spine. She wasn't just careful, she was connected. Jonah called a tech officer to confirm, but the man's tone over the phone made my stomach knot. Sir Lambert hasn't been in since yesterday afternoon. A pause. He called in sick. Jonah hung up, his expression tightening. She's a step ahead of us, he said. If she's cleaning digital files, we need physical ones. We drove to Blue Ridge Memorial, the hospital where both Nova and Lucia's records had originated. The clerk in medical archives was a thin woman with silver glasses and shaking hands. When Jonah showed his badge, she hesitated, then led us down a narrow hallway to a locked room that smelled of dust and antiseptic. Rows of cardboard boxes stacked high years of births, deaths, and forgotten lives. She flipped through one labeled 2019 and froze halfway through. "There's something strange here," she murmured, pulling out a slim folder with a torn tab. Across the edge, faint pencil marks spelled two letters, LV. Inside the first page listed a female patient 27 years old who had given birth to a girl. Half the name had been scrubbed away with correction fluid, but I could still see the beginning of a signature M. Serva before the line was sliced off. I pressed my hand against the paper. "Lucia Vega," I said. The clerk looked pale. Who would erase that Jonah closed the folder carefully? Someone who wanted her gone. That night, the call came. Jonah's voice was tight, the kind he used when bad news outweighed caution. "They found something in Hendersonville," he said. "A construction site. It used to belong to Harlan Gage's company." My breath caught. What did they find? Silence stretched before he answered. "Bones. Human bones." Hours later, I stood behind the yellow tape, the air heavy with mud and floodlight glare. Forensics teams moved like ghosts, their gloves glinting under the lamps. A detective approached Jonah, handed him a tablet. He read, then looked at me. "DNA confirmed," he said quietly. "It's Lucia Vega." My knees nearly gave out. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The woman whose name had vanished from every file was lying in a shallow grave, barely 30 miles from where I'd tucked her daughter into bed. They found Harlan 2 towns over, drunk and rambling in a motel parking lot. Jonah called me the next morning after the interrogation. He confessed to helping move the body, Jonah said. Said Maris paid him, claimed she told him Lucia was blackmailing her, threatening to take the baby back. He said he didn't know she was already dead when he helped bury her. Jonah paused. But there's more. He said that wasn't the first time she'd done something like this. "What do you mean?" I asked. Jonah's voice lowered. He said she tested her plan once, before tried to stage an accident that failed. The victim survived. I stared at the rain sliding down my window, the reflection of my face fractured by the glass. Every breath I took felt heavier, filled with ghosts. Who, I asked, finally, who survived? Jonah hesitated, then said, "A man named Caleb Rohn. He used to work at the same hospital. He vanished right after Grant died." Outside, the night pulsed with the sound of thunder over the hills. In the distance, I could hear the wail of a siren carrying Lucia Vega's body toward the city morgue. I stood at my window watching it fade into the dark, my hand pressed against the glass. Everything Maris had built, her perfect house, her perfect story, her perfect lies, was cracking apart. But I knew this wasn't over. Somewhere out there was a man who had lived to tell what she'd done. And if I could find him before she did, maybe I could finish what Grant's death had started. The morning of the trial broke gray and cold, a thin mist clinging to the courthouse steps, like the breath of the dead. I stood outside Buncombe County Court with my hand gripping the folder so tightly the papers inside had creased. Jonah was already waiting at the doors, his coat damp from the drizzle. "You ready?" he asked quietly. I nodded, though I wasn't. No one ever is. Inside the courtroom was washed in that pale, sterile light that makes everyone look a little ghostly. The air hummed with whispers as the bailiff called the session to order. Harlan Gage was led in first wrists, cuffed face drawn and gray. He didn't look defiant, just hollow. Then Maris entered wearing a charcoal suit, her hair pinned back every inch of her controlled. Her lawyer followed close behind, whispering something that made her jaw tighten. When her eyes met mine, they didn't linger just one cold glance, like I was an inconvenience she'd already accounted for. Jonah began by laying out the timeline. He played the video retrieved from Maris's basement safe. Her voice filled the courtroom low and steady, almost proud. I'm only taking back what should have been mine. The timestamp glowed in the corner of the screen, Grant's date of death. Every word after that was a knife to my ribs. She described the way she planned the scene, how she wanted it to look like an accident, how freedom sometimes comes disguised as tragedy. When the video ended, no one spoke. Then came Harlan's testimony. His voice was ragged, his eyes darting between me and the floor. She told me Lucia Vega was trouble, he said. Said the woman was trying to ruin her life, take the baby back. She said she needed help cleaning up a mess. He swallowed hard. I didn't know she'd killed her. I thought she just wanted me to move something, get rid of some stuff. The prosecutor pressed him for more. Did she ever mention anyone else? Yes, Harlan said after a long pause. A man named Caleb. Said he used to work at the hospital, that he wouldn't keep his mouth shut. She gave him something in his drink, said he crashed his car. I never saw him again. The defense jumped up, objecting, claiming the video and statements were fabricated, that Harlan was desperate to save himself. Maris sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the table. When it was her lawyer's turn, he tried to unravel everything, questioning the chain of custody, claiming the video could have been edited. Jonah stepped forward with quiet authority. We anticipated that he said and displayed a new set of evidence, transaction logs, and camera footage pulled from the hospital's old backup servers. The footage showed a familiar hallway, a newborn's wail echoing faintly, and Maris, still in scrubs, pushing a wheeled crib out of the maternity ward. The room went still. Even the judge leaned forward. That backup was automatic, Jonah explained. It was stored off-site and never deleted. He looked straight at Maurice. You erased every copy but the one you couldn't reach. When they called me to the stand, my knees nearly gave way. I took the oath, then looked at the jury, 12 strangers who would decide whether my son's life meant anything. I began at the beginning, the blanket, the trash, the night I brought it home and felt something hidden inside. My voice trembled as I spoke of the phone, the photos, the messages. When I reached the part about the threats, I took a breath and pulled the folded paper from my purse. This was left at my door, I said. Stop digging, or you'll follow your son. For the first time since the trial began, Maris's head dropped slightly, her fingers curling against the table. I looked right at her. You threw away a blanket to bury your crimes, but it carried the truth back to me. I said, my voice steady now. I reached into my pocket and held up the small piece of mint fabric, its edge faintly stained, the stitches uneven. This is what you tried to destroy. It's the last thread my son ever touched. The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I turned toward the jury. No mother should have to learn the truth this way, I said, but I couldn't let my granddaughter grow up surrounded by lies. Not again. Hours later, after closing arguments blurred into one another, the jury filed out. 2 hours passed long enough for my body to stiffen, for my hope to ache. When they returned, I saw it in their faces before the foreman spoke. Guilty. 6 counts of first-degree murder. Life without parole. Maris didn't flinch when the sentence was read. She stood as the bailiff moved toward her, her voice calm, almost casual. You think you've won, Rhea? She murmured as she passed. They don't respect you. They pity you. I didn't answer. I just watched her walk away, her heels echoing against the marble. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight inside me begin to shift. Outside, the rain had started again. Thin, steady drops that sounded almost like the ticking of a clock. The world didn't celebrate or mourn, it simply kept moving. And as I stood on the courthouse steps, the folder clutched to my chest, I understood something I hadn't before. Justice doesn't heal. It only opens the door so healing can begin. 6 months later, the mountains were green again. The air smelled of lilac and wet soil, and my house in Asheville finally felt like a home instead of a waiting room for grief. Nova's laughter filled the hallways. She had her father's smile, the kind that reached all the way to her eyes, and every time she giggled, something in me stitched itself back together. That morning, I was folding laundry when I saw her sitting cross-legged on the floor, a ball of mint green yarn in her lap. Her small fingers clumsy but determined. "Grandma," she said, tongue poking out in concentration, "I want to make your blanket again." My breath caught. She had found the color on her own, the same shade I'd used years ago. I knelt beside her watching as she looped the yarn over her tiny hook, her movements uncertain but full of care. In that moment, I realized what she was really doing. She was rewriting our story, stitch by stitch, turning something born from pain into something that could hold warmth again. I opened the cedar chest in the corner and pulled out the old blanket washed clean, but still carrying the faintest trace of its past. I laid it next to her new one. Sometimes I said gently, "The old stitches have to be undone, so the new ones can be strong." She nodded, not fully understanding, but smiling anyway. That afternoon, Rafael Vega drove up from town. He brought flowers, 2 bundles, one of roses for Grant, one of lavender for Lucia. The 3 of us went to the cemetery just as the sun dipped behind the hills. 2 graves side by side, one marble white, one soft gray. I spread the old blanket over Grant's stone, smoothing the edges the way I used to smooth his hair when he was a boy. Nova placed her lavender sprig on Lucia's grave, her small hand steady. Raphael handed me an envelope. "Lucia wrote this," he said. "Found it in her things after the trial." The paper was thin and faded, the handwriting elegant and shaky. "If my daughter ever finds love and safety in another's arms, let her carry the name of the one who gives it." I read it twice before I looked at Nova chasing butterflies along the fence. "She will," I whispered. "She already does." A week later, I filed the paperwork. Her new birth certificate read Nova Vega Calloway. Both names, both histories joined in truth. That night, I opened the cabinet and found the new blanket she'd been working on. The pattern was uneven, the color shifting from pale mint to cream. I threaded a needle and began to help guiding her small stitches into alignment. Then quietly, I took a strip from the old blanket, the edge where the bloodstain had long faded, and sewed it into the underside of the new one. Not to hide it, but to keep it. Some scars shouldn't be erased. They remind us that love survived. When we finished, Nova held it up to the light, proud and breathless. Outside, the sky blazed orange and gold. She ran to the porch, the blanket trailing behind her like a banner. Raphael leaned against the doorway beside me. "You kept it," he said softly. "I couldn't throw it away," I replied. "It's part of the story now." Nova laughed, spinning in the last light of day, and I felt a peace I hadn't known since before the first tragedy. I turned to Raphael. "We can't sew time back together," I said, "but we can teach them how to mend their hearts." As the sun sank behind the ridge, I folded the 2 blankets, one that once hid a crime and one that now carried love, and placed them side by side. Between them was everything I'd lost and everything I'd found again. The first blanket had carried death. The second carried life. And somewhere between the two, I finally found my way back to the light.